all arrested. The children separated from their mothers. In St. Petersburg and scores of Russian cities, more protests, more than 6,000 arrested now, though the protests are in the hundreds, not the hundreds of thousands. Alexei Navalny, the opposition leader imprisoned for opposing calls for protests every weekday in Russia at 7 p.m, weekends 2 p.m. Truth is not a concept here, it's a commodity. Manufactured, controlled, distributed from the Kremlin via state TV. There is no war. There is no invasion. Say otherwise, and you can get 5 years inside. Call a spade or an invasion, and they will come for you in Russia today. Echo Moscow Radio and TV Dosh, two of the last surviving independent voices, shut down by the state for, quote, premeditated false information, talking about an invasion and a war.
Здесь не было никакого письма, то есть случилась блокировка, а потом уже мы получили это письмо. И как бы так как там размыты были требования, то не понятно, что удалять. Ну, то есть там просто закрыть.
Journalists from both now fleeing the country for their own safety.
Наташ, все хорошо, Наташ, слышите?
So how many Russians see images like this then? Their soldiers, now prisoners of war in Ukraine, given food and a call home to their mothers in tears. We can't verify these images, but they do appear to be genuine. Moscow's superficial normality belies the global freeze. Panic buying at IKEA, as the furniture giant says it too is joining the rush to get out of Russia, closing all 17 of its stores here. DHL, almost all major car companies, Nokia, Harley-Davidson, Adidas, Disney, H&M, Puma, Nike, Apple, Boeing, all of them joining world sport in severing Russia from the rest of humanity.
Дорогой фондовый рынок, ты был нам близок, был интересен. Покойся с миром, дорогой товарищ.
Gallows humor as a financial analyst toasts the Moscow Stock Exchange, now shut for a fourth consecutive day. Another Russian's response on social media to Apple's pullout. And who needs the likes of Western iPhones, says Maria Butina, MP and former spy.
Ну что, родные мои, нам в очередной раз бросили вызов. А компания Apple приостанавливает продажи своих смартфонов в России. Но это на самом деле совершенно не беда. В моих руках вот такой вот замечательный телефон, отечественный телефон Aya T1.
Нашими лучшими в мире ракетами.
Russia responding in other ways. Its space agency telling the Americans today they can fly their astronauts on broomsticks after Moscow banned engine parts in retaliation. A little nearer ground level, broomsticks or Airbuses, companies like Aeroflot grounded from large parts of the world now, as Russia's economy is shut down day by day, hour by hour.
Alex Thompson in Moscow for us tonight. Well, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that Western leaders are preparing for war against Russia and that Moscow would press on with military action in Ukraine until the end, whatever the end is. Well, Channel 4 News was the only British broadcaster to be given access to the video-linked press conference with Mr. Lavrov this morning. Kathy Newman quizzed him on civilian casualties, the death of 10-year-old Polina Zapadinskaya, who was shot by Russian troops near Kyiv as she attempted to flee Ukraine with her family, and the launch of the war crimes investigation by the International Criminal Court.
Mr. Lavrov, I want to ask you about Polina Zapadinskaya. She was in her final year of primary school. She was shot dead by the Russians as she was in her family car in Kyiv on Saturday. Mr. Lavrov, I know you have a daughter yourself. I want you to look me in the eyes and just tell me, how do you sleep at night knowing that Russian bombs and bullets are killing children?
Могу сказать дополнительно к тому, что я уже сказал.
So what can I say in addition to what I've said already? Any human life is priceless. Any military actions are unfortunately connected to human loss, not just amongst the military personnel, but amongst the civilians. Our military personnel who are now involved in this special operation have a very strict order to only use high precision military equipment to suppress the military infrastructure. Even the barracks where the Ukrainian army resides are not subject to any attacks. I can only express my condolences.
But you say Mr. Lavrov, you say high precision is used, but hundreds of civilians have reportedly already died. This is now being investigated by the International Criminal Court. I wonder if you personally are preparing your defense in the War Crimes Tribunal.
Понимаю ваши желания такие вот острые вопросы задавать. У вас будет аудитория.
I understand your desire to ask such heated questions as you want to emotionally charge your audience. This is your job, as far as I understand, to function as mass media, but rather as an instrument for hammering into people's head the information that is required by the Western leaders. I want to say once again, I am not justifying any action that leads to the death of civilians, but we were not the ones who came up with the expression of collateral damage. It was coined by our Western colleagues during their escapades in Iraq and previously in other countries, Latin America, Libya. Have you once used the same emotional charge covering the events in Iraq and Libya when there were hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties? I can't recall. So I see that your question is a rhetorical one.
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Lavrov, I have. But this is, you started this war. Polina's blood is on your hands, isn't it, Mr. Lavrov?
Понимаете, играть вот в эти игры, вы сейчас...
You are now playing a game as a talk show host. If you want to know my personal opinion, I believe I have already expressed it very clearly, including the humanitarian aspects of the current operation. But I would really like you to, though I understand you will be covering it the way you're required to, but I really want you to bear in mind, and I hope that a journalist who is fulfilling a brief has a conscience, how you've conducted yourselves for the last 8 years, when girls just like that one, along with women and the elderly, were killed by thousands of mimes in the Donbass. They were killed by the Ukrainian regime. Please visit the website of our ministry for more information, as I don't want to take up your time with long stories.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to European Politics and Society. And this is being recorded, and I will upload the recording of the class to YouTube, and then I'll put the link on the Cyber Campus website so that you can watch it again. And this is an interesting time, obviously, to be taking this class, European Politics and Society. Let me, before I forget, let's do the attendance for the class, because that needs to be done, and we need to cover the introduction. Sorry, got to move my microphone so you can hear me more clearly. We need to do the attendance for the class, and that needs to be done as we make sure that we cover the introduction to the class in terms of getting organized and reminding ourselves of how the class will function. So let's, before I go further in talking about European Politics and Society today and the perspective of this course, of course, on what is going on in today in Ukraine, in the middle of Europe, from the point of view of the European Union and the impact of European integration on European national states and the national states that represent different European nations. Of course, we know that Russia is not part of the European Union. We know that a big part of Russia is within Europe, but is not part of the European Union. Ukraine is, of course, part of Europe within the geographical region of Europe, but it's not within the European Union. But it's, I think, quite fully legitimate and necessary for us to talk about what's going on in Ukraine, the fighting going on in Ukraine and elsewhere. Earlier, before some of you were born, like, for example, in the Balkans, in what is today Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, Republic of Northern Macedonia, as another region within Europe that beginning 30 years ago began its descent into chaotic civil war with the kind of violence that we are seeing today in Ukraine, and that risks escalating in Ukraine to a magnitude or scale that's exponentially larger because Ukraine is larger than the Balkan area, where today the Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia are located. But the similar comparable conflict dynamics that produced and resulted in genocidal violence, the efforts to erase other national groups, we saw happen 30 years ago through the 1990s until the end of the Bosnian War in 1995. And we're seeing similar dynamics happen today in Ukraine. And how does this relate to the European Union? That will be a theme for this class, because the European Union is a focus of another class I teach. Right, in the fall I teach policymaking of the European Union policymaking, and in the spring I teach this course, European Politics and Society. And the focus of this course is upon the impact of the European Union and European integration on the individual member states within the European Union. And today there are now 27 member states, members of the European Union. There were 28, but Britain left the European Union 2 years ago. Well, officially, was it a year? No, 2 years ago. Yeah, the end of January 2020, right before the pandemic began. Britain left the COVID-19 pandemic began. Britain left the European Union, so 2 years ago. So the 27 member states in the European Union, and the European Union aims to bring peace. One of its aims, not its only aim, but one of the aims of the European Union is to bring peace to Europe. And of course, Ukraine and Russia are part of Europe. The Balkan countries, the Balkan nations, the Balkan peoples, the Serbs, the Croats, the Macedonians, the Bosniaks, they're part of Europe. And so we will critically evaluate the European Union in terms of its impact on the nation states of Europe to promote peace or otherwise. Because a theme I will make in this class is that the European Union, because it's imperfect, because anything that human beings make is not perfect, has inadvertently or unintentionally, I'm not saying it's due to somebody's criminal act. Hi, Anise. It's nice to see a familiar face, Anise from last semester. And Subin, I think, is another familiar person. That the European Union unintentionally, not because of any kind of criminal decision, has made or contributed to the violence, the fighting going on now in Ukraine between Russians focused upon their nation state, the Russian Federation, in conflict with Ukrainian nationalists who in Ukraine want to be part of the European Union, and the European Union, rightly or wrongly, being perceived in Moscow as the dominant image, not the only image, but the dominant image today in Moscow, that the European integration is a threat to Russian national identity. And this might generate guffaws, criticisms, but Russian nationalists and Russian nationalism, a prevailing view in Russian nationalism is that what is today Ukraine is the cradle of the Russian nation. It's where the Russian nation began. And the Russians, I might say, someone else might say that that's wrong. Nevertheless, that's the prevailing view in Russia. And like in the Balkans 30 years ago, among Serb nationalists, the prevailing view among Serbian people in the Balkans is that Kosovo where there is Albanian population predominates today. Kosovo was the cradle of the Serb nation. That's where the Serb nation was born, or it was fundamentally established in the region called Kosovo, even though today the overwhelming majority of people that live in that region are not Serbs, they're Albanian and for the most part Muslims, where of course the predominant religion among Serbs is Orthodox Serbian Orthodox Christianity. Like in Russia, it's Russian Orthodox Christianity. And for Russian nationalists, Ukraine is where Russian civilization began in that region. And by that region having its separate state inherited from the Soviet Union and then moving to join the European Union means cutting out the cradle, removing the cradle of Russian civilization from Russian national identity. And these identity issues, both on a personal level and on a collective level, when we're talking about big groups like nations, are complicated, and they serve a lot of emotional and cognitive functions, and they are evoked and evolve and develop over time. I know that, we know that, but they're very, very powerful. And all of this discussion that I'm sharing with you now has been expressed by different people over the last few weeks, the last few months, since this crisis with Ukraine and Russia began attracting lots of international media attention. And it's interesting to me how these Russian claims to ancient Ukraine or Kievan Rus, the Rus kingdom, Russia, one of the established over 1,000 years ago in what is today Kiev and that region, is dismissed by some commentators in the West as, oh, well, that's not really justifying Russian intervention. And they might be right. But from the Russian point of view, given how much their identity is shaped by the 20th century and the suffering of Russia and the Russian people and Russian civilization during the 20th century, both in World War I and in World War II, to expect Russia to simply forget about Ukraine as being part of the Russian nation is a highly dangerous assumption or demand to make, not just on Vladimir Putin, this one individual, or even a group of governments, a government in Moscow. This is an issue of great emotional intensity to the millions of Russians living in what we call Russia. And it's, for all intents and purposes, it exists. It may change and develop over time, but in 2022, now it exists. And what strikes me in a lot of this media discussion is how quickly some commentators in the American media dismiss these claims of Russia as not legitimating Russian intervention, but at the same time, American government and American political representatives are quite willing to tolerate, for example, Israeli nationalist claims to all of Jerusalem and what they call Judea and Samaria. So Judea and Samaria is the greater Israeli nationalist name for what is called the West Bank occupied territories, Palestinian occupied territories on the West Bank of the Jordan River. that Israel conquered in 1967 during the June 1967 war. And the Israeli nationalists, Jewish nationalists, have been expanding their territory, their settlements on that territory since it was conquered in 1967. While the US has continued to provide Israel with a tremendous amount of foreign military and economic aid, and the Americans have never really stopped Israel from this progressive settler colonization and de facto annexation of what Jewish nationalists call Judea and Samaria. Those are the names in the Bible. Some of you may be Christian, in the Bible for that region, Judea and Samaria. You know, King David, king of Judea. So we see the power on the part of a close American ally of these symbolic notions that this is where the Jewish nation is rooted, the Jewish nation is founded, and Israeli nationalists have already declared that Jerusalem, which the eastern part of the city of Jerusalem was conquered in 1967, that is the undivided capital, eternal capital of Israel, because of the emotional attachment to Jerusalem and all of Judea and Samaria. You know, like Abraham, the biblical founding first father of the Jewish and Semitic nations, he's supposedly buried in Hebron in the West Bank. And hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers have moved into that territory. And the current Israeli government, after the removal of Benjamin Netanyahu, is led by a man named Naftali Bennett, who is openly declared that Israel, his government, is never going to give up that territory. So clearly we can see, what strikes me is how these comparisons with Israeli nationalism never really come up in the media coverage I personally have encountered over the last 2 months, paying somewhat close attention to these media reports and the academic Zoom meetings that happen almost throughout the week, every week for the last at least 2 months on this topic. And we see the power of Israeli Jewish nationalism as intensely committed to that territorial value of Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. But we see so many Western commentators somewhat dismiss or maybe not dismiss, but be unwilling to appreciate the power of Russian nationalism in terms of how, for Russians, Kievan Rus is the cradle of where Russia began. And it was separated from Russia, not by Russians, it was separated by the communists. The Bolsheviks under Lenin, Vladimir Lenin and Stalin, when they created the Soviet Union in the early 1920s, they created these republics that did not exist in the Russian Empire before the communists came to power during World War I. They did not exist in the Russian Empire. They created these boundaries, these republics that emerged in the Soviet Union, in the Russian Republic and Ukrainian Republic and Belarus and Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan and Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. These were all created by Lenin and Stalin in the 1920s, these boundaries. And they're created to serve a number of different functional aims. But one of the functional aims was to try to persuade, to the extent possible, together with suppress through coercion, suspicions among the many, many different national groups in the old Russian Empire that the Bolshevik communists had inherited, that the Soviet Union was not simply a new form of a Russian Empire. That the Soviet Union, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was not a Russian Empire with a hidden mask or disguise behind a mask of the Soviet communist system. No, no, it really is not a new Russian Empire. So these boundaries were drawn and these republics were created. One of the functional political aims being to appear to weaken the political predominance of the Russian nation in the old Russian Empire, in the Soviet Union. That was one of the functional aims. And that's why you heard Vladimir Lenin's speech, Vladimir Putin's speech, that these boundaries that were inherited after 1991, when these republics that Lenin and Stalin created became independent states, that those boundaries are unacceptable to Russian nationalists because the Russian nationalists were oppressed by the communists. Russian nationalism was illegitimately punished, suppressed. Russian identity was illegitimately punished and suppressed by the Bolsheviks, by the communists. And the reason I'm describing this is because these are the same kinds of rhetoric or similar kinds of explanations that Serb nationalists gave us 30 years ago when they fought to try to redraw the boundaries that were drawn by Tito in Yugoslavia in the middle 1940s. That the communists in Yugoslavia, when they took power, they undertook the same functional aim, which was to draw the boundaries of the republics of Yugoslavia that they were creating in a way, including the aim, in a way to weaken the political predominance of the Serb nation within Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia was about 22 million people when it broke up, and about half of that population was Serb. The others were Slovenes, Croats, Macedonians, Bosniaks, Albanians, and other groups. And to try to convince those other smaller nations that Yugoslavia is not really a smiley face disguise or mask for Serb empire meant drawing those boundaries, creating those boundaries in Yugoslavia in a way that, for example, 30% of the population of the Serb population in the old Yugoslavia found themselves in Croatia and Bosnia and elsewhere when in 1991, Yugoslavia collapsed. And now they were Serb minorities under the domination of peoples the Serbs often do not like because they do not like each other. Under Croat dominance in domination in the Republic of Croatia, or under the alliance of the Bosniaks and Croats against the Serbs in Bosnia, and so on. So I'm telling you this because this is what I'm writing on in this and working on right now in the midst of this crisis in my own research. And how does this relate to the European Union? Again, the European Union claims that one of its critical aims is to bring peace to Europe. Peace to the most violent part of the world historically, that as recently, as 1999, there was fighting going on in Macedonia that killed hundreds of people, or at least tens of people. Over a couple hundred of people may have died in that violence before the Europeans succeeded in stopping the fighting. But 100,000 died in Yugoslavia. Hundreds of thousands, even millions of people became refugees in that violent breakup of Yugoslavia as the Serbs tried to redraw the boundaries to expand Serbia and liberate what they viewed Serbs outside of Serbia from being threatened by Croatians and Bosniaks and so on. I'm not saying it's true or not, but that's the prevailing view. And now you have similar conflict happening in Ukraine involving Russia. And there are, of course, fundamental differences in the Russian-Ukraine case from the Serb-Yugoslav case. One of the most important differences, of course, is that the Russian nation has a vastly greater relative power capability towards the rest of the world than the Serbian nation. Serbian nation national group is only about 10 million people. There's at least, 170 million Russians in the old Soviet Union. The Russian Federation itself has almost 150 million people within the Russian Federation. Of course, Russia has thousands of nuclear weapons that they're continually reminding us that they have. The Russian military is vastly bigger than the Serbian military, the military that Serbia had. The Russian economy, of course, is vastly bigger than Serb economy when you compare the two. Still, Russia's economy, entire economy, I think is about the size of South Korea. Comparable to South Korea. That's not that big. I mean, that's the 11th biggest economy in the world, but that's about 60% of the French economy. And most of that Russian economic activity, particularly, is focused upon oil and gas production. So that gives them leverage in international relations because so many countries want to buy Russian oil and gas. Serbia doesn't have any oil and gas, obviously. So that's a critically important difference between Serbian irredentism and Russian irredentism. But still, today we are in 2022, and for the last 4 or 5 years, international observers have been warning that the peace agreement in the former Yugoslavia that was decided in the mid-1990s is failing, that Bosnia in that region, Bosnia is falling, is slowly disintegrating politically. This is even before the conflict between Russia and Ukraine escalated. The International Crisis Group did a study that came out 4 or 5 years ago that said Bosnia is slowly unraveling. And now, and this, again, this is the European Union, despite the European Union and the United States through NATO devoting their resources to controlling and influencing this small region of Europe, the Balkans, with Serbs, 10 million people, 5 million Croats, 3 million Slovenes, 1.5 million Macedonians, a few million Albanians. They cannot completely control that region, despite all of their money, despite all of their military capability. And what does this, and now we're confronted with the crisis of Russian irredentism in Ukraine. And it illustrates to me the power of nationalism. And this has been a theme that I address in my work. Like, what is nationalism? What are the different forms of nationalism? How does it emerge? What is it? What should we do about it? Should we oppose it? Should we insist upon? How do we control it? How do we create conditions that nationalism doesn't intensify? Because that's the big challenge to peace in Europe, and the European Union as a peace strategy is how, I think, and I will argue, is how to deal with European nationalisms. German nationalism, French nationalism, Italian nationalism, Spanish nationalism. Obviously, the European Union did not succeed in avoiding the rise of British nationalism. Brexit, Britain's exit from the European Union, is a manifestation of British nationalism. So the reading for this course that I already posted on the website is focused not on Ukraine, not on Serbia, not on Russia, all right, but it's focused on the member states, not all of the member states. It selects certain member states, and then it also engages in a theoretical application. An application of theories of European integration to try to understand what is going on in those European member states in terms of how Europeanization has affected the politics and the political behavior within Spain, France, Germany, Poland, Bulgaria, Britain. There's a chapter in the book on Britain, even though Britain left the European Union. Why did that happen? I mean, the author of the chapter on Britain struggles with that question. But that's the point, that the challenge, the main challenge to peace in Europe is nationalism. And the European Union has not really, in my view, been very effective in dealing with the challenge of nationalism. And unfortunately, for peace in Europe, the European Union is seen as a threat to Russian national identity. That the European Union is seen as a danger to Russian national self-expression. And that's a great tragedy. Because if you want peace in Europe, if we want to maintain peace in Europe, we have to accommodate and be aware of the challenge of nationalism, and not just German and Russian and Italian and Spanish and British nationalism, but we also have to deal with other European nations, and that includes Russia, that includes Serbia. So that's the, but let's examine what the European Union has done in the current member states. And that's the focus of the reading in the class. What has been the impact of European integration on the countries that are in the European Union, including Britain that eventually left? Why did Britain leave the European Union? And this, again, all comes back to this question of what is nationalism? And I believe myself as having been unbelievably fortunate, having a great professor who taught me about nationalism and has a theory of nationalism that I use. And I think I have something to offer to through applying my professor's work to trying to understand the impact of European integration and what is nationalism. But when you read the book, and this book is a recent book that we're using, was published in 2020 from Oxford University Press, one of the top academic publishers in the world. It's a book that has different authors. And let's go ahead and I've talked a lot. Let me go ahead and go to the website and show you the material here. So we go to material. And so I put the course textbook up here. And so here's the, I'll make sure, let me show you how this works to make sure I'm sharing the screen. So we go here, and here's our course website. And so there you see, there is a PDF copy of the book. I sent you a message yesterday that you can go pick up the paper copy of this book at DocuCopy at the store across the street from the entrance to the university on the left there, across the street from the 7-Eleven. So this is the book, The Member States of the European Union, published by Oxford University Press, 3rd edition. So it's a popular book. It's been published more than once. This is the 3rd edition, and it's an edited book. In other words, it has many different authors writing different chapters, edited by these two. And so here you see Oxford University Press. It came out in 2020. And so here you see the chapters. The chapters are written by different professors, different academics. And so here you see there's the introduction, which is the assigned reading for this week. And we'll go look at that reading here in a bit. And then you see more analysis, member states in European integration, Europeanization, concept, theory, and methods. What does this notion of Europeanization means? You know, all of the authors in the book, I think you can see, oh, can you see that? You should be able, let me see just a second here. There we go. I think you can see that. All of the authors in the book assume that European integration is Europeanization. So if you're not in the European Union, you're not Europeanized. You might be Europeanizing if you're attempting to join the European Union. And you know that, again, yesterday or day before yesterday, the president of Ukraine urgently requested the European Union admit Ukraine immediately, now, into the European Union. Which, again, for me, indicates that the European Union is seen as an adversary by many people, as an adversary of Russian identity, Russian nationalism. And again, for peace, I think for peace in Europe, that's a tragedy. But let's go back to talking about the chapters here. So you can see there's a chapter on France, Europeanization. Yeah, but let's go back here and talk about this chapter. Europeanization is about the impact of European integration on the politics and government and administration of each of the member states, and of the impact of European integration on the politics, government, and administration of the member states. So there's a chapter on France, there's a chapter on Germany, there's a chapter on Greece, there's a chapter on Spain. All of these are, you can see the different authors here. There's a chapter on Sweden, Poland, Bulgaria, the United Kingdom, and then a summary chapter, and then more theoretical discussion of what Europeanization means in terms of looking at the impact of European integration on the institutions of government in Germany and France and Italy and Bulgaria and Poland, impact of Europeanization on the political parties in each of the member states, and Euroscepticism, the rise of hostility to European integration among nationalist parties. And of course, the biggest influence of Euroscepticism, of course, was on the exit of Great Britain of the United Kingdom from the European Union. The impact of Europeanization on interest groups and social movements, the impact of Europeanization on the policies of the member states, the impact of Europeanization on the provincial and regional governments within Spain and Germany and Italy and other regions of the European Union. Has the European Union made or changed the political profile and raised the political autonomy and role, for example, of the province governments in the member states, which of course, again, is important because of the power of nationalism and the nation state in European thinking about what it means historically. I mean, this is before the 20th century, about what it means to be French or German and so on. The impact of Europeanization on the national economies and the conclusion. So each of these different professors, you know, they were given a task, an assignment, a job to write a chapter on these topics. And so they each have their different perspectives that they may or may not be explicit about in terms of explaining the theoretical framework that they are each using in their analysis, but they each have their own individual perspectives. So that's their perspective. And of course, Bulgaria is particularly interesting for a lot of reasons for me, because before coming here to the Catholic University of Korea, I taught for 15 years at the American University in Bulgaria. So I was at the American University in Bulgaria from 1994 until 2009. And I came here in 2009. And so I came to the American University in Bulgaria when the war in Yugoslavia was still underway. So let me open up a Wikipedia page and show you American University in Bulgaria. So here's the American. Everybody's got a nice Wikipedia page, right? Sometimes these pages are you have to be careful about these pages, because people and actors will spend a tremendous amount of money and effort on trying to polish and refine the entries in these Wikipedia pages in ways that serve their own agendas, right? So including political agendas. So I was here for 15 years at the American University in Bulgaria, and there you see some professors teaching and the new campus that's being built. And this university was largely funded by the United States government, by the US government. It began operations in 1991. And as I said, I came in 1994, but the US government has provided much of the money. And so everyone knows that fact, that the American University in Bulgaria is funded by or supported by the US government. And the US ambassador, when I was there, always attended the graduation ceremony at the end of the academic year in May, when they would have graduation. The US ambassador to Bulgaria always attended the graduation ceremony at the on the award stage for the students to receive their diploma. The American University in Bulgaria would have a meeting of its board of trustees at least twice a year. Yeah, twice a year in Bulgaria, and the US ambassador would host a dinner. So the point I'm trying to make is that this university, although officially was not part of the US government, it was seen as unofficially an unofficial ambassador or extension of the US government in Bulgaria. So that meant a lot of influential people spent a lot of time there or effort there at the American University in Bulgaria, because they thought it was important as a place in which representing unofficially American government influence in Bulgaria and in the Balkans. And so you can see some of the people that attended the graduation ceremonies and so on. As I told you, I came in 1994. This is all being built with US government aid money. And why in Bulgaria? One of the reasons why is because Bulgaria historically is a country that has a close emotional, positive relationship with Russia. So you can see this is your typical public relations photo. This is the name of the university, including in Bulgarian language, which is close to the Russian language here in Bulgarian. And this building was previously the regional headquarters of the Communist Party of Bulgaria, in that region of Bulgaria, in what is traditionally part of Macedonia. And the university opened here in this building because the mayor and governor of the region in 1990-91 basically said American University in Bulgaria could have this building for free. They could use that building and not pay any rent. So that was one of the reasons, not the only reason, but that was one of the reasons why the American University in Bulgaria ended up in this building in the town of Blagoevgrad. And Blagoevgrad is a region, you can see here is the town that was, this was all built under the communists in the 1990s as their form of urban renewal. In the 1980s, sorry, in the 1980s, this was built by the Communist Party to rebuild this town. And you can see it's very beautiful. There's the Pirin Mountains in the background. And this is in the part of Bulgaria that is part traditionally of Macedonia. So another more nice pictures on casino. Yeah, you can tell this is obviously post-communist picture because they legalize gambling and have lots of gambling places in the area. Big tourism potential, beautiful country, but a poor country, the poorest country in the European Union, the poorest country in the European Union, and one of the countries that suffers the most from corruption in the European Union. So it's poor enough to the extent that many people have left Bulgaria to get jobs in Western Europe or in Canada or the United States. And so the population has fallen from almost 9 million 30 years ago to around 7 million today. because so many people have left the country to go make money and send money back home to their families in Bulgaria, going to Canada, Australia, United States, as well as Britain and Germany and other countries. And they're not the only ones. Of course, Albanians and others and other people have done that as well. But a country that has a big tourism potential because it's such a beautiful, mountainous, warm, nice country close to the Greek border. What else can I show you? Okay, here you can see the rebuilt, this is the Bulgarian Orthodox Church that was rebuilt. This must be the fall here, at fall time in the fall this is all rebuilt by the communists in the 1980s. And there's a monument to a Russian military officer who, here you can't see, there's a big rock here, and chiseled on the rock is a homage to a Russian military officer, a colonel in the Russian army that occupied this area and helped liberate it from the Ottoman Turkish Empire in the 1877 to 1878 Russo-Turkish War that liberated much of Bulgaria from the Ottoman Turkish Empire. And the Russian colonel, the Russian military that occupied the territory, his name is chiseled in this big rock that you can't see here, right here, placed right here in this picture. Again, this was created by the rebuilt by the Bulgarian Communist Party in the 1980s. So there's this pro-Russian element to this portrayal. And so the American University in Bulgaria was established in Bulgaria. One of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the aims being to try to counter this strong Russian, pro-Russian sentiment in Bulgaria, viewing the Russians as their liberators in the 1877-1878 Russo-Turkish War, sharing a close language, a close religion. Bulgarians claim that Bulgarians were the first Christians among the Slavic peoples, and that the first Slavic language Bible, the Bible being translated into Slavic language, was written in Old Bulgarian language, led by Cyril and Methodius, patron saints of Christianity, and so on. And so let me see what else. So here's Blagoevgrad. Here's a map of Bulgaria, and this is where Blagoevgrad is located. And pick it's interesting how we lost the city, but you can see that Blagoevgrad is here. So this is Macedonia, which is today called the Republic of Northern Macedonia, Republic of North Macedonia. So, Macedonia in the former Yugoslavia, when the wars was breaking out in this region, because this is Serbia here, this is Macedonia, this is Greece down here, here's Turkey, that I came to the American University in Bulgaria when the war was ending, at the end of the wars in the Balkans, in Bosnia and Serbia and elsewhere, which is over here. So I was doing a lot of work on the wars in Yugoslavia, and so we see a similar dynamics underway in the wars in Yugoslavia that began 30 years ago, with the fighting underway and the violence and conflict underway in Ukraine today. But this region, whole region is traditionally called Macedonia, and Bulgaria, through war at the beginning of the 20th century, was only able to get this part of what is traditional Macedonia. Macedonia is traditionally much larger than the current Republic of Macedonia. So you can see here, according to, let me make sure you can see that this is the traditional region of Macedonia. So Bulgaria, through war, got this part. Greece occupied this part. And so you can see Macedonia is bigger than North Macedonia. So how does this relate to the European Union? Again, one of the main claims of the reasons for the existence of the European Union is to bring peace to Europe. And the European Union 30 years ago was unable to prevent this horrible war breaking out in what was then the former Yugoslavia here. That, as I said, caused at least 100,000 people to die, terrible war crimes, not just killing people and innocent civilians, but raping tens of thousands of women, millions of refugees fleeing this region when Yugoslavia disintegrated after communism ended in this area. And one of the reasons to put the American University in Bulgaria here was to try to make sure that Bulgaria did not, or try to work to ensure that Bulgaria did not become involved in this fighting in terms of claiming this territory, because Bulgarian nationalists tend to claim that there is no such thing as Macedonians, that Macedonians were a creation of Serb Belgrade brainwashing of these people after Serbia conquered this territory at the beginning of the 20th century and brainwashed these people to make themselves believe that they're not Bulgarians, that they're instead Macedonians, but really they're Bulgarians. And again, those of you who've been paying attention to the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, that's what Russia's claiming today, that Ukrainians, they were a creation of the communists. Lenin and Stalin created Ukraine. Lenin and Stalin and the communist system, until it fell apart 30 years ago in 1991, brainwashed so many people in the cradle of Russian civilization to make themselves believe that they're Ukrainian, and they're not Ukrainian, they're Russians, except for certain groups in the west part of Ukraine that was conquered by Stalin and the Soviet Union during World War II, and then was added to Ukraine today. The Western Ukraine, Galicia and Volhynia regions, where Lviv is located. Same language, that these people, there is no such thing as a Macedonian nationalism. That was something that the Macedonian nation, that didn't exist, that was a product of brainwashing. And that's what Bulgarians say about these people. This exists because Serbia controlled this area from early 20th century until 1991 and brainwashed these people to believe that they're Macedonian. Wow. And so, I mean, I'm hearing this 30 years later because I went to Bulgaria when I finished my PhD, right, in 1992. So I was how old was I? 24 when I went to Bulgaria. 34 when I went to Bulgaria. 32 when I went to Bulgaria. And here we are 30 years later in 2022, well, 35 years later, sorry, 28 years later, in 2022, and I'm hearing the same kind of language regarding Russia in terms of how they describe Ukraine. And Bulgarian nationalists say the same thing, that this is where so much of Bulgarian national identity was created. This is where our greatest king in our history, Tsar Samuil, this is where he had his capital was in this region, that this is part of the cradle of Bulgarian national civilization. The same kind of language we hear today coming out of Russia regarding Ukraine. And the Bulgarians have acquiesced to losing this territory. Why? Because they're politically weaker, much weaker than Russia. Serbs claim this was Kosovo, was the cradle of their Serbian national identity. That's where they were born as a nation, and they're continuing to resist giving up Kosovo, even though NATO attacked them in 1999, bombed them to force them to give up Kosovo. So what has been the impact of Europeanization and European Union integration on Bulgaria? There's a chapter on Bulgaria in the book. There's a chapter on Greece in the book, on Europeanization in Greece in the book. I mean, Greece, Bulgaria, they were involved in horrible fighting over 100 years ago over this territory. Atrocities, mass killings, forced population movements, forced populations expulsions, and not just Greece, also involving Turkey, right? That there used to be millions of Greeks that used to live in Turkey until the early part of the 20th century. They're all gone. All the Greeks that have lived here for hundreds of years, even thousands of years that lived in this area, all gone since the 1920s. By agreement between the Greek government and the new Turkish government after the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and the Bulgarian government, massive forced population movements. The Turks being forced out of Bulgaria and Greece and Serbia to go live in Turkey, and the Greeks and others being forced out of Turkey to go live in Greece. There is precedent for that. The Treaty of Lausanne. And again, why am I telling you this? Because I'm afraid this is going to be repeated in dealing with Ukraine. That you can see the Treaty of Lausanne covers here the territory, but what I want to highlight here is the population exchanges that these governments of Turkey and Greece agreed to the forced migration of literally millions of people to resolve their conflict or their fighting. And it never really completely resolved it, but so we could well see, and then of course we saw again also the forced population expulsion, the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia. And I'm afraid that this is what's going to end up being, if we prevent World War III from happening, emerging out of this crisis in Ukraine, that we're going to see something comparable happen in Ukraine. That Ukraine is going to be partitioned. And there will be, here's a map of Ukraine here. Let me make sure that you're actually able to see this. So you can see here's a map of, this is Ukraine. This is the territory that was added to Ukraine at the beginning, during World War II. All of this territory was added to the Soviet Republic of Ukraine during World War II. This is where Lviv is located, Lvov in Polish. These are your most intense Ukrainian nationalists. You can see here, right, that this is the Ukrainian Republic here the what was their claim. So this territory was added to Ukraine in 1954 by Khrushchev, and then the Russians in 2014 occupied it and took it back when Ukraine overthrew its pro-Russian elected president, Viktor Yanukovych, 8 years ago in 2014. And they overthrew, and this ties in with the European Union theme. The protesters overthrew Viktor Yanukovych with the encouragement of the European Union, with the encouragement of the United States, of those protesters to overthrow Viktor Yanukovych in the so-called Revolution of Dignity, when Viktor Yanukovych refused to sign an association agreement with the European Union, not NATO, the European Union. And when Viktor Yanukovych refused to sign that association agreement, protests began in Kiev, and Viktor Yanukovych's police attempted to suppress them with violence and killed at least 100 people. And after that killing happened, before that killing happened, Herman van Rompuy, the first president of the European Council, of the new European Council that came into office in 2010, sorry. He went to Kiev and applauded the protesters. Victoria Nuland, who was in the Obama administration of the United States as Assistant Secretary of State, she came to Kiev and actually gave food, sandwiches to the protesters against Yanukovych because Yanukovych refused to sign the association agreement with the European Union. John McCain, the candidate for president, Senator John McCain of the United States, the candidate for president of the United States that lost to Barack Obama in 2008, he came to Kiev and to demonstrate in support of the protesters against Viktor Yanukovych. So I think Kiev is located here. I'm afraid that as the violence escalates and increases, and it's escalated, it's getting worse and worse and worse. We're going to see something like what happened in Bosnia. Forced population transfers, the people that feel like Ukrainian nationalists, they're going to run over here. And this is going to become de facto annexed by Russia. Again, there's precedent for this happening in the Balkans, beginning in the early before, but actually being legally recognized in the Treaty of Lausanne in 1921. And this happened at the end of World War II. There were population transfers between Poles and Ukrainians at the end of right after World War II. So there's international legal precedent for doing this. And that means millions of people are going to lose their homes, in addition to lots of death and violence. And so here you see the, what are they calling it? The Revolution of Dignity. So I think you can see that. This happened 8 years ago. The Revolution of Dignity is how they're describing it. It was also known as the Maidan Revolution, took place in Ukraine in February 2014, at the end of the Euromaidan protests, when a series of violent events involving protesters, riot police, and unknown shooters in the Ukrainian capital, Kiev, come in the ousting of elected President Viktor Yanukovych and the overthrow of the Ukrainian government. In November 2013, a wave of large-scale protests known as Euromaidan erupted in response to President Yanukovych's refusal to assign a political association and free trade agreement with the European Union. So he refused to sign that association agreement because the Russians were pressuring him economically and pressuring Ukraine, punishing Ukraine economically, because the Ukrainian economy is still closely tied to the Russian economy because of the inheritance from the Soviet Union in terms of roads, railroads, pipelines, factories, getting their suppliers from different factories all through the old Soviet Union to supply factories in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin was pressuring Viktor Yanukovych not to sign the association agreement with the European Union. And so Viktor Yanukovych acquiesced. He announced, despite all of his promises when he was running for president, that he wanted Ukraine to become more closely associated with the European Union. He suddenly announced in November 2013 that he was not going to sign the association agreement with the European Union. This began the protests in Kiev, or triggered them, primarily by young people like you. And as I mentioned, Victoria Nuland came and said, yay, and came to Kiev to show her support. So did Herman van Rompuy of the European Union. So did John McCain. And then to suppress the protests, Yanukovych's police fired on the protesters, killed, we don't really know. And in response to the killing, he finally fled, and he's living in Russia somewhere. And it was at that point, when he was removed, he fled from office, that Vladimir Putin in Moscow and the Russian government began to, they occupied Crimea and encouraged the Russians in eastern Ukraine to rise up and separate themselves from the Kiev government in the Donbass. So this area in 2014. But again, the point I want to emphasize is that this violence occurred when the Ukrainian president refused to sign an association agreement with the European Union. And when that led to the overthrow of the democratically elected president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, that began the disintegration encouraged by Russia of the Ukrainian state. So the European Union is supposed to be the self-proclaimed breakaway states of Donetsk and Luhansk. So you can see them here. The Donetsk People's Republic and the, see Luhansk, where's Luhansk here? In Luhansk, this area. And now the Russian military is moving to occupy more of this territory. They're driving towards Kiev here. There have been some airstrikes in this region, but I don't see news reports of Russian military trying to move towards Lviv. So Lviv is considered to be the most important center for Ukrainian nationalism. You can see here, make sure you can see it. And we lost the city. Huh? Okay, so there you can see Lviv. Okay. So that's unfortunately a tragedy. If the European Union is about peace in Europe, the European Union, a theme I've covered, those of you who had me last semester, like Anais, I might have said this in a class with her before. Unfortunately or fortunately, it's a fact that throughout Eastern Europe, European Union and NATO are considered to be two sides of the same coin, right? NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, led by the United States and its military, is one side of the same coin. The other side of the coin is the European Union. In other words, you can't separate NATO from the European Union. So all this discussion about how Ukraine should promise never to join NATO, that if Vladimir Putin and Moscow is threatened by Ukraine joining NATO, it's not just NATO, it's the European Union. The 2014 violence and overthrow of Yanukovych began when Yanukovych refused to sign an association agreement, a free trade agreement, an FTA with the European Union, not with NATO, with the European Union. So Russian nationalism sees a threat not just from NATO, they see a threat from the European Union, that the European Union is a long-term covert threat to solidify the boundaries that Lenin and Stalin drew in the 1920s to illegitimately and unjustifiably partition the Russian nation, to commit that crime of the partitioning of the Russian nation, including from their cradle, Kievan Rus, right? So let me see what comes up when I, okay, so here you can see, here is Kievan Rus, according to Wikipedia. And so Kievan Rus is where supposedly the Russian nation began. You can see here. until they were conquered by the Mongols, Genghis Khan and his offspring. Foundation of the Kievan state. When the Russians adopted Christianity, they became Christians under the ruler of Kiev. Under Vladimir the Great, I think you can still see that, ruling out of Kiev. Grand Prince of Novgorod and Grand Prince of Kiev. And again, just to repeat myself, it's interesting in the commentary I see that a number of commentators I've heard or seen on Zoom, they say, well, this is all not really justifiable for, you can't justify what Russia's doing because of this claim, right? And that may be true, but at the same time, we shouldn't underestimate its power, particularly since the United States is seeing its close ally Israel act in the same way regarding Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem, the cradle of Jewish national identity. Right? These are identity value conflicts over the same territory. Of course, Ukrainian nationalists claim, no, this is the cradle of the Ukrainian nationalism. This is the cradle of the Ukrainian nation, not the Russian nation. The Ukrainian nation, they claim, or they point out, and there's no right or wrong answer, but they point out there wasn't any kind of reference to Moscow until the 11th century. That's the first time we hear about anything about Moscow in any of the historical records written down by monks was in the 11th century, long after Kievan Rus was founded. Moscow is the foundation of modern Russia, not Kievan Rus. Kievan Rus is Ukrainian, not Russian. Ukrainian history, not Russian history, Ukrainian history. And people become emotional about this, right? Because you can't understand politics unless you understand the role of emotion. And that means nationalism. So how has the European Union dealt with nationalism among its member states? And to circle back here to our focus of our course, is that European Union doesn't get enough credit for its successes, because some of you who know history know, of course, that Polish and German nationalism has an intense history of conflict. That Poland and the Polish people and the German nationalism do not have a nice history, that they have a history of intense conflict, most notably during World War II, right? You also know that French and German nationalism was an intense conflict leading up to, of course, the creation of the European Union after World War II, leading up to, during, and including the Second World War from 1939 to 1945. And today, you and I hear little about conflict between French and German nationalism. I don't encounter any kind of reports about French and German nationalism being in conflict. I see and encounter little discussion about German and Polish nationalism and being in conflict. Despite the genocidal violence that happened in Poland, largely, not only, but largely by the German occupiers. And of course, the Soviet occupiers as well in 1939. Auschwitz was on Polish territory. The Polish name for Auschwitz is Oswiecim, right? By some estimates, a fifth of the population of what was Poland died in the Second World War. The German occupiers attempted to erase the Polish nation. They tried to eliminate, liquidate, kill the Yangban, the Polish Yangban, the Polish intelligentsia during World War II. And let me see what comes up when I do Auschwitz here. Yeah, so make sure you can see that. But again, I rarely, if ever, encounter any kind of discussion about Polish and German nationalism being in conflict. This is German occupied Europe. So there you see, in German, the term, in Polish, the name is Oświęcim. The German name for that town is Auschwitz. So you can see, and again, but you don't hear much discussion at all about, and there you can see this territory that was conquered by the Soviet Union during World War II and was added, some of it to Ukraine, some of it was given to the new Polish country state that would emerge here. Some was taken from Germany and added to Poland. And there was, again, massive population movements at the end of World War II. At least 12 million Germans, 12 million Germans were expelled from this territory to go live in primarily in Western Germany by the end of World War II. 12 million. So I've heard bigger estimates. The biggest forced population transfer ever happened of Germans who were fleeing the Soviet army as the Soviet army began to win the war, push back the Germans, right? You can see farthest German army advance. And then when they were pushed back, all of the Germans that had lived in this area for hundreds of years, even many centuries that were living here, they were pushed out or fled because they're going to be killed and as punishment or retribution against the crimes of the German occupiers during World War II. Again, there is this precedent established of forced population movements to finally solve political nationalist conflicts. And I'm afraid we might see that happen again, happen in Ukraine today in 2022 going forward. As the violence and the emotions that go with the violence escalates, as the violence escalates, the fear, terror, hatred, and disgust become more and more powerful in influencing the behavior of people, recreating what happened 30 years ago in Bosnia. So, you know, here is, let me see, Bosnia-Herzegovina. But again, well, before I talk about this, I should conclude my point, right? My point is that that today you and I don't encounter much discussion at all about German and Polish nationalism being in conflict. And a part of that explanation as to why I don't encounter, at least I've never seen it, some serious discussion or serious concerns about Polish nationalism and German nationalism contributing to dangerous conflict between Warsaw and Berlin today has to include European integration. That part of an explanation as to why German and French and Polish nationalism are not disrupting peace between Germans and French and Polish people has to do with Europeanization, European integration. And so since we don't have much intense conflict between Germans and Polish nations, we have some conflict, there is some, but it's not anywhere, it's nothing compared to what we saw in the 1930s and 40s. Nothing. And so it's a non-event. There's not the threat of war between Poland and Germany today. There's not a threat of war between Germany and France today. And so it does not get media coverage because nothing happened. There hasn't been an escalation threatening violence between Germans and Polish people today, or between French and Germans today. So there's no media coverage. So you don't hear about the successes of Europeanization, success of European Union as a peace strategy. You don't hear about its successes because they're non-events. So European Union doesn't get much credit, doesn't get enough credit for its successes because it prevents bad things from happening. Only when it's blamed for failing to prevent war does the European Union become a big focus of attention and it's criticized. Oh, the European Union failed to prevent war in Bosnia. Oh, the European Union failed, supposedly, in Bosnia. So here's the website for Bosnia. You know, World War I began in Bosnia, or was triggered by events in Bosnia in 1914. There you can see the breakup of Yugoslavia. How does it, will this work if I show it to you? This nice little map here, 1989. You can see they declared independence in 91. These Serb areas rebelled, didn't want to be under control of outside forces. Then 1992 declared independence, and a war broke out in Bosnia between Croats and Serbs and Bosniaks. 93, you know, I came in 94 there, you know, then you see this. And then you had the ongoing conflicts, and you see, oh, 9, and then NATO bombed to separate Kosovo from Serbia. Romania, Montenegro declared independence, and that's where we stand today. Montenegro, this country, is now part of NATO. So is Croatia and Slovenia, but not Serbia. Montenegro is part of NATO, and that infuriated evidently the Russians because they view all this as basically Serbia, and that Serbs are the traditional allies, the traditional little brothers of Russia. And this situation is becoming more and more difficult. The European Union just sent more soldiers into Bosnia to try to enforce the peace agreement there. And this case, you know, Slovenia is part of the European Union. Croatia was the last country to join the European Union in 2013. Croatia joined the European Union. Slovenia uses the euro. Croatia not yet, but it wants to. Probably will start using the euro currency very soon. That this has been the main focus of European Union peacemaking. That this is surrounded by European Union member states. Greece is part of the European Union. Bulgaria since 2007. Romania since 2007 is part of the European Union. Greece joined the European Union, I think, in 1984. Hungary joined in 2004. Austria joined in 1995. And Italy is a founding member of the European Union. And so the European Union focuses upon the Balkans as the European Union has to be successful in enforcing and maintaining peace in the Balkans. The European Union is blamed or criticized for failing to prevent war in the Balkans beginning in 1991. They're criticized for that. It's probably not fair. The Americans didn't help them. The American government probably even undermined the European Union peace treaty negotiations to try to come up with a new constitution for this area. You can see this country is a mix of a number of different groups. Serbs, Croats, and Muslims, Bosniak Muslims live here. None of them were a majority. Nobody was 50% of the population. So you see Serbs here, Croats here, Muslims here, and these Croats would rather be part of Croatia. These Serbs would rather be part of Serbia, and the Bosniak Muslims don't want them to leave and join those countries. They want to keep this territory. But it's not working. And it's not working because the European Union is not able to accommodate, has been unable to accommodate nationalism among these people. And I'm afraid it's not able to accommodate nationalism in dealing with Russians. And nationalism is just a fact. So I wanted to, again, I wanted to give you an introduction also to me, like what kind of research am I doing? So I had something opened up here, and I hope I can find it again. Okay, yeah. Here our peace plans proposed for Bosnia, 100,000 people died in war here out of about 4.5 million people. So there are different plans put forward to try to restructure the constitution of Bosnia in a way that would lessen the fear and hatred among Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks, the Muslim population here. And so this is what I've been suggesting in the current discussions, that we need to come up with a form of the Vance-Owen peace plan for Bosnia needs to be looked at as a model that's adjusted for Ukraine to try to bring peace to Ukraine. And this needs to be done now, because every day that the fighting continues in Ukraine, people's fear and hatred and disgust intensifies. And if we do not intervene now, before this conflict intensifies, this plan was not introduced. Cyrus Vance was Jimmy Carter's Secretary of State under the Jimmy Carter administration in the United States. And Lord Owen was representing, Cyrus Vance, however, was representing the United Nations. He was the United Nations envoy for the crisis in Yugoslavia. Lord Owen was the representative for the European community, which became the European Union. And so this was a UN-EU plan. Even though Vance was an American, it was a it was a United Nations European Union plan, not an American plan. And it would have divided up Bosnia-Herzegovina into 10 different cantons. I think, yeah, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cantons, 10 provinces, some with Serb majority, some with Croat majority, some with mixed majority. This is something like I'm suggesting that needs to be adopted for the Ukraine. This failed. This was not implemented because the Americans didn't support it. The Americans decided, we're going to blame the Serbs. The Serbs are the bad guys. We're going to blame the Serbs the way we're all blaming the Russians today. The way so many people are, not everybody, but so many people are blaming the Russians. We're going to blame the Serbs. And so we're not going to compromise with the Serbs because the Serbs are the aggressors. The Serbs are the bad guys. So we're not going to accommodate their demands. No. And so the Americans undercut Vance-Owen plan. And so this is in early 1993. And so the fighting continued. And then with the final agreement was the Dayton Accords, which has basically been been in place ever since. Is now in Bosnia. And basically it recognized the partition of Bosnia after hundreds of thousands of people were pushed out. So like virtually no Muslims live here, no Croats live here. In Republika Srpska, here you have a federation of the Bosniaks and the Croats, the Catholic Croats and the Muslim Bosniaks, and they hate each other. They don't like each other. They don't like the Dayton Accords because they say it's unfair that the Serbs get their own republic, but the Muslims and the Croats are forced to be together in a federation. It's not fair. We want our own entity if we're Croats. We don't like Muslims. And so nothing gets done. It's extremely difficult to get anything agreed by the government in Sarajevo. They can't carry out reforms. It's incredibly corrupt. So much of the population, half of the population, more than half of the population that was registered to live here doesn't even live here anymore. They left to go get jobs in Europe and in Croatia and in Serbia. Over half the population left because the situation is so bleak. The future is so dark. So they can see no future for themselves because of, who's going to invest here? Is Samsung going to build a factory in Bosnia? Is LG going to build a factory in Bosnia? Is Danone going to build a factory in Bosnia, the French company? Since we have some French students here, who's going to? It's so corrupt. You can't do anything without bribing somebody. And there's always the threat of more violence. Who's going to invest here? So that's what I've been working on. That's what I've been arguing. But as I mentioned, every day that this violence continues, something like this becomes more and more politically difficult, if not impossible. And I'm afraid it doesn't look good. I mean, the European Union is not, the European Union's public statements are solidarity with the United States against the evil Moscow, Vladimir Putin, the new Hitler. I mean, if you want to stop the violence, you want to stop the fighting, that's not the kind of language you need to use right now in Ukraine. But that's what we hear coming out of Paris and some European figures. So that's what, again, that's why I'm excited about this class. What I've learned since I came to the American University in Bulgaria to the present, what do we need to do? Even little, I mean, again, there's only 10 or 11 million Serbs in this whole territory of the former Yugoslavia. And still the European Union is having great difficulty maintaining a peace in this region. When they're dealing with 10 million Serbs and 4.5 million Croats and 3 million Bosniak Muslims, how are they going to, maintain a peace unless they accommodate Russian nationalism in Ukraine? They need to do that. But I'm not optimistic, quite honestly, because of the vested interest in that alliance with the United States and NATO, right? That the prevailing image in the European Union today is that European integration is successful because of American support. And so they do not want to distance themselves from the United States. Even though from the Russian point of view, NATO, United States, European Union. NATO, United States, European Union. Okay, so let's continue to get the class set up here. So the textbook is available, and we also have to do attendance, and so we haven't done attendance yet. So let's do smart attendance. Hooray, smart attendance. Then we start attendance, and the number is 613. 613 is your smart attendance number. So let me go to chat and put in 613 is your number there. So please enter in 613 for smart attendance. And I've spoken for a long time, and I typically don't want to speak so much because I prefer to interact more with exercise and activities. But I think I wanted to give you an introduction to me, not my personal background so much, but like give you an understanding of how I'm approaching the material in this class. Because the European Union, European integration was trying to bring peace to Europe. And the fact is that the dominant view in Russia, in Moscow today, is that the European Union is a danger to Russia. And that's not good for peace. It's not good to prevent horrible war crimes. It's not good to prevent terrible human suffering. And we saw it in Serbia, and we saw it in Yugoslavia, and now we're going to see it on a much larger scale in Ukraine, We're seeing it right now. Despite the fact that the European Union is supposed to be a strategy for peace in Europe. And so that's the inspirational presentation, the motivational speech I'm giving to you to get really excited about studying this topic. Even though the European Union can be criticized because it's seen as the soft power civilian side of NATO, European Union, it doesn't get enough credit for its successes, like any explanation as to why Poland and Germany and France cooperate together today, despite their terrible history, has to include European integration. Why did the violence come to an end in 1998 in Northern Ireland? The Troubles, right, that emerged in Northern Ireland. Let's see if I can pull that up. That's been a lot in the news these days because Britain's left, the United Kingdom left the European Union. And so the Troubles, let me see, make sure that you can see that. Screen share, the Troubles, right? The violence in Northern Ireland. Why did that violence largely come to an end in 1998? Any explanation as to why that violence that began, say, in the late 60s to 1998, so we're talking almost 40 years. How did that violence end? And again, this is a small area. There's only like 1 million people live here. There's only 1 million people live here. And it took so much effort to bring peace to this region when after the violence started. So much political efforts and resources devoted to this, including by the European Union and also the United States and other countries to try to end the violence here. And any explanation as to why that violence ended has to include European integration. It's not the only factor, but it is a necessary factor for any explanation as to why they were able to stop the civil war in Northern Ireland that killed 3,500 people in a little region of about 1 million people. And any explanation for why that violence ended has to include European integration. And now, of course, we have new concerns because since the United Kingdom left the European Union, the British nationalists living here are very upset about the future of this area, perhaps economically being too closely tied to Ireland, which is in the European Union. This is part of the United Kingdom. This is not technically part of the European Union anymore because it's part of the United Kingdom, but this is part of the European Union. And because of European integration, there is no boundary between these two places. There's no police checkpoint. There's no customs checkpoint. You drive freely across the border here and nobody stops you. Nobody checks your passport. Nobody inspects your trucks or your cars. And that has been an important, and that was because of European integration, European Union integration. So that would be one of the successes of the European Union. But how many people give enough credit to the European Union for that? European integration. Not enough. Okay, so let me go back to the lesson plan here. Again, make sure you can see the screen. Oh, that's the wrong one, sorry. Here it is, okay. So we go share screen. So this course, keep in mind, the European Union won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012. The European Union won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2012. In 2012, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to the European Union for over 6 decades, having contributed to the advancement of peace and reconciliation, democracy and human rights in Europe by unanimous decision of the Nobel Peace Prize Commission. It goes on here. The decision highlighted the reconciliation of France and Germany, stating that over a 70-year period, Germany and France had fought 3 wars. Today, war between Germany and France is unthinkable. This shows how, through well-aimed efforts and by building up mutual confidence, historical enemies can become close partners. The decision also highlighted the European Union's contribution to the introduction of democracy in Greece, Spain, and Portugal, which were under military dictatorship until the 1970s. The advancing of democracy and human rights in Turkey, the strengthening of democracy in Eastern Europe following the revolutions of 1989, and overcoming of the division between East and West and ethnically based national conflicts, and finally the European Union's contribution to the process of reconciliation in the Balkans. And then in 2014, we saw violence break out in Ukraine following Ukraine government refusal to sign an association agreement with the European Union. Okay, so here you see the expansion of the European Union, beginning with the 6 founding countries, then Britain and Ireland joining in 1973, then Greece joining in 81, then Spain and Portugal in 86. Then in 1990, 95, more prosperous developed countries joined, 2004 here, and then 2007 here, and then 2013, Croatia joined. And that's where we stand now. Britain left in 2020. Okay. So let me go back to the lesson plan, and again, stop share, make sure you can share the screen. So again, I just want you to get excited about, why are we studying the European Union? Is it just about money? Is it just about, yeah, it's about money, but it's supposed to be about peace. Peace, which we don't have in Ukraine now. And the European Union is tied up with that conflict. And to understand the threats to peace, we have to understand nationalism. We have to understand nationalism. And I have to tell you, all of the authors of your textbook, they don't really know how to deal with nationalism. I think I know how to deal with it. But the authors of your book, of the chapters, they're kind of, they know it's critically important. Nationalism is really important, but they don't know really how to theoretically conceptualize what it is. I do. I'm sorry for being so immodest, but I have a book. Again, it was from my professor when I was a student. See if I can find the book here. I put it somewhere. I want to find the book. This is my Bible. Well, I'll show it to you on Amazon. This book is my professor's book that has his theory, political psychology theory of nationalism. This book, Nationalism and Politics, the Political Behavior of Nation States. This is what I've spent most of my efforts in terms of being a political scientist, using the theory in this book to understand European integration, American foreign policy, Russian behavior in Ukraine, Serbian behavior, and so on. And it came out over 20 years ago. Oh, somebody's got a chat. Oh, you want to? Oh, we're going to vote today. Okay, let's do a vote. Okay, so before we, okay, well, yeah, let's do a vote now. Okay, let's do a vote. Let's go stop share, and let me go back to the website. Let me see. I got to get reoriented again. I've got two browsers opened up, Safari and Chrome, and so Cyber Campus. Okay, so and let's go to vote here and make sure that I can show you the screen. Okay, screen share, and so go here, and so you can see I have some exercises prepared, which of course we never get a chance to get to them. Here's the question. The European Union is a superpower. Do you strongly agree, neutral, cannot decide, disagree, strongly disagree? What's your view? There's no right or wrong answer. Please vote. So far, 3 people have voted. 4, I think 7 people are. So 3, neutral, cannot decide. 2 agree. Yeah, I mean, is the United States, what is a superpower? Is China a superpower? Is the United States a superpower? How could a superpower like the United States, if it is a so-called superpower, what is this thing called a superpower? It was defeated in Afghanistan last year. The Americans left in their allied regime, went poof, it just disappeared. In August of 2021, remember? The United States was defeated in Vietnam. The Soviet Union was also defeated in Afghanistan. The European Union, the Americans are having difficulty enforcing their will on little Balkans, on little Serbia. What does it mean to be a superpower? Does it really rely upon military force? I mean, the problem in Ukraine is that Ukrainian identity is a very complicated topic. There are intense Ukrainian nationalists, but there are also a lot of people that feel strongly Russian in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin and the Russian government in Moscow may have overestimated how strong pro-Russian sentiment was, and they may have underestimated the strength of Ukrainian nationalism. Apparently, they did underestimate the strength of Ukrainian nationalism. There is a Ukrainian national identity, according to what I think of the news reports coming out. These people are fighting and dying. If they thought it was hopeless, they wouldn't do it, but they are fighting because they're Ukrainians. There are a lot of people in Ukraine that feel Ukrainian, but there are also a lot of people that feel Russian. And like most nationalists, the Russian nationalist government overestimated its power capabilities. So it underestimated the strength of Ukrainian nationalism. But still, I'm sure that there are a lot of Russian self-identifiers in Ukraine. People that are living in Ukraine, have Ukrainian passports, but they feel in their heart that they are Russian first and Ukrainian second or third in strength. So this invasion will show the strength of Ukrainian nationalism. But again, if nationalism is very strong, it can defeat even the United States and even defeat the Soviet Union as it did in Afghanistan in the 1980s. These mighty superpowers. So again, there is not much discussion at all in the book about military integration of the European Union. There's really not discussion at all about military integration in the European Union, that book published 2 years ago in our textbook. But that is becoming an important topic now as well. You see here, we go back to the lesson plan. Yeah. Political science, my professor, the author of that book that I just showed you, he said political scientists should view themselves as zoologists. We are zoologists who study Homo sapiens, and that's particularly focusing upon the orientation of people to form in-groups, particularly to be nationalistic. There's something in our DNA that makes us act nationalistically. And I'll talk a lot about what that is next week. You know, there's not any discussion in the book about military integration in the European Union, but there is now. Because of the response to the Russian invasion, there's lots of discussion now about increasing Germany's military contribution, the size of the German military budget, and also increasing the size of European Union military aid to Ukraine. And this is all happening with a framework of permanent structured cooperation. This is not discussed in your book, but this is the framework for developing the military capability of the European Union. And now there's been a big push to increase the amount of money for permanent structured cooperation, or PESCO for short, PESCO, permanent structured cooperation. And so we're likely to see a big boost in the efforts to integrate the militaries of Germany and France and the other member states of the European Union under some kind of European Union military command. The Germans have agreed to boost their defense military expenditures by a large amount. And I would expect that that investment of Germany is going to go towards the creation of a European Union military infrastructure, a European Union military command that will become more and more important. They've already created that foundation years ago, and they're going to expand that out and develop that further as a result of responding to the Ukraine crisis. What's this? The European Union Observer. I got to remind myself what yeah, here you see, this is from just a couple weeks ago. The European Union has sent more peacekeepers into Bosnia. So the European Union is sending more peacekeeping soldiers into Bosnia because the situation in Bosnia is becoming more and more difficult. The Serbs don't want to be together. They want to join Serbia. This is just from a year, 2 weeks ago. And they've been working on that for 30 years. Again, beware of these Wikipedia sites. This Wikipedia site, you can tell, is written and created by somebody who's very pro-Russian. This is the Russian claim that Ukraine is all part of the Russian world. And that includes the cradle of Russian civilization, what is today called Ukraine. On January 31, 2019, Patriarch Kirill of Moscow declared concerning the religious relationship between the Russian Orthodox Church and Ukraine, Ukraine is not a periphery of our church. Kiev is the mother of all Russian cities. For us, Kiev is what Jerusalem is for many, including the Israeli nationalists. Russian Orthodoxy began there in Kiev, so under no circumstances can we abandon this historical and spiritual relationship. The whole unity of our local church is based upon these spiritual ties. Ukraine is Russian, or at least Kiev is. Okay, so what I would like you to do to conclude for today, this class, is to I will ask you, I mean, here's the syllabus, right? I mean, I already uploaded the syllabus to the class, so stop share, so maybe screen share, and so go to the syllabus. And so I would ask you for next Friday to prepare to read chapter 1, and well, beginning next Monday. We meet on Monday, right? So on Monday, read chapter 1 and chapter 2 of the book, and on Friday next week, a week from today, we will have. I would like you to submit a 150-word paragraph on this topic. To South Korean and European national governments remain generally more important for Seoul's foreign policy aims than the European Union. In other words, if you're the government of South Korea, should you focus upon European Union or should you focus upon Berlin, Paris, Rome, the member states? Should you talk to the European Union leaders, the European Union government institutions like Borrell, the representative of the European Union, or should you talk to the Prime Minister of Germany, the President of France, or the Prime Minister of Italy? If you want to get something done for your country, if you are South Korean, with whom do you spend your time? On whom do you spend your efforts? European Union or the government of Germany, the government of France, and the government of Italy, and the other member states of the European Union? And there's no right or wrong answer, right? I just want us to debate this topic. What's more important, the European Union or the member states of the European Union in getting what you want as the government of South Korea, or the government of Washington, United States, or the government of Russia, or the government of China, or the government of Ukraine? Do you talk to Berlin or do you talk to Brussels? Who is more important to spend your time influencing? So I will post this again more clearly over the weekend, okay? So that you can write a 150-word paragraph. Let me see. Let me open up the syllabus. Don't get nervous about this. It's not graded. I mean, I give you some points for doing the exercise, but I just want you to be aware that we're going to start getting organized here. And so you can see here it says share screen. Let me open up the syllabus. I will post the syllabus. So yeah, for week 2, write a 150-word paragraph on this topic. To South Koreans, European national governments remain generally more important for a country's foreign policy than the European Union. If you're the president of Ukraine, do you call the European Union on the phone, or do you call the government of Germany on the phone? Do you call the government of France on the phone and ask for help to deal with the Russians? Yeah, I mean, because we're in South Korea, but all of your European students, you're honorary Koreans, but you can also write it, answer from your own perspective. And so I will give you more instructions about this tomorrow, okay? Maybe later today or tomorrow morning, all right? And then we'll have a debating class on Friday, okay? Okay. Okay, so get excited, work for peace, save the human race, prevent nuclear war,